Hello, hello, hello. Ah, hello, hello, hello. It is exactly one on the dot, and we are waiting for all of the live streams to catch up and get us going here. So, give us just a minute while everything gets started. Hello, Cobalt. How are you today? Do, do, do. Waiting for that message to go out on Moan. There we go. Looks like it has happened on Moan as well. So, yay, yay, yay. Excellent. Good to have y'all. Let me get started. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is another live um, Dating Kinky, and I am doing a Throwback Thursday. So I have started these Throwback Thursdays where I dig into some of the things I've done in the past and I talk about them from a new perspective, and I give y'all the opportunity to engage and be a part of all of this. So, hi, for those of you who don't know me, I am Miss Nookie. I am the founder of Dating Kinky. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am a hedonistic, dominant cuckoldress pimptress who is polyamorous and monoromantic. And today we're going to be talking about how we change our minds when we get out of relationships. And this was a really interesting little tidbit because every once in a while, someone on FetLife or another social media will necro one of my posts. And that's like they'll love or they'll comment on a really old dead post. So they'll necro it, they'll bring it back to life, which always, 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 always makes me wonder how they found my post or where they ran across it. But sometimes, like, I see it and I see the title, like, Your Ex, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I wonder, what did I write? I have written so much over the years that I don't often know exactly what it was I wrote. And so with this one, for example, it popped up on my feed and I was like, I wrote that. So I had to click through my own writing to see what it was that I'd written. And when I did, it I was totally gobsmacked. I'd forgotten it entirely. Um, it made sense at the time and it still does, but I had sort of like lost the idea. And so me from October of 2016 educated me from 2022 with a little tidbit of information that I'd totally forgotten and now need to rework into my conscious worldview. So I'm going to be sharing that piece of content with you today. And then I'll share some of the comments that I got. And of course, I will take any questions or engagement that you'd like. For those of you on YouTube or Facebook, feel free to post in the chat. For those of you on Moan, feel free to raise your hand and I will bring you up on the stage for audio. So let's get started. Your ex, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Actually, it's you and them. So back in 2016, Innermind on FetLife commented on one of my writings and said, it's always fascinating when someone writes about how awesome their lover is when they're together and then just trash them once the relationship ends. Were they dating two different people? Which is what inspired me to write about this because I've thought about this quite a bit. And I'd say that there's one primary reason for this. According to Incognito, The Secret Lives of the Brain by David Eagleman, your brain is made up of an entire parliament of pieces and parts and subsystems. Beyond a collection of local expert systems, we are collections of overlapping, ceaselessly reinvented mechanisms, a group of competing factions. The conscious mind fabricates stories to explain the sometimes inexplicable dynamics of the subsystems inside the brain. It can be disquieting to consider the extent to which all of our actions are driven by hardwired systems doing what they do best, while we overlay stories about our choices. Which, that's a lot of words, but at the time it really struck me. And I said, it's why we want to lose weight and get healthy while simultaneously skipping a workout and eating ice cream out of the container. Or why we decide to work harder and get ahead in our careers and find ourselves operating with the same habitual behaviors. So knowing that, it's like a battle in our head between our two selves. You have two wolves inside of you, the one who wants to work out and get healthy, and the one who wants to sit on the couch, watch drama, and eat ice cream out of a container. Who are you going to feed? Right? It's like that. It's not unlike a political election, right? So in our interior political election, actually in my interior political election, I have incurable romantic me, fights for the relationship and the love, and focuses only on what goes right. Right? And then I've got skeptical cantankerous me, which fights to show all the bad things. Those things will lead to ruin, to hurt, and to loneliness. And just like politics, we don't just have two parties with their own agendas. We've got Captain Save-A-Ho me, our white knight of social justice, sees what skeptical cantankerous me is focusing on and just knows it's because our partner hasn't been loved enough and gets to the task of changing that, right? And then we've got blubbering Bonnie me who can't help but despair, thinking of how all these types of things have ended in the past. And there's crazy as fuck me, who will fly off the handle with rage, with love, with lust, with power. You never really know. But strong emotions fuel crazy as fuck me. And if crazy as fuck me breaks free from the straitjacket, well, we've all been there at least once in love, right? Give me some feedback here. All of us have fallen to the prey of crazy as fuck me, right? The person who flies off the handle, and it may be because we're feeling so much love or so much lust or power or whatever it is. But we look back and we say, I don't know what I was thinking. I was crazy, right? So like a political campaign, those selves in our heads are jockeying for power. And when they are tops in the polls, they act. Right now, these days, posting on social media. Never has a daddy been so amazing ever. Heart, heart, heart. I whoop you, Snooky Whoopums. Signed, Incurable Romantic Me. Right? We all do this. Now, whether it's posting to social media, whether it's sending little love notes, whether it's telling our friends, gushing to our family, right? And we realize that incurable romantic me, for example, is more socially acceptable than what crazy as fuck me from our fight last night might have to say, right? Okay, so these things go on and on through the relationship. When skeptical, cantankerous me makes a really good point, or crazy as fuck me gets loose and wreaks havoc, and the opinion polls start to swing their way, incurable romantic me steps up their game with over-the-top political ads, telling friends, family, and the world how wonderful things are, and swings things back their way. And like in politics, in some campaigns, the candidates are relatively friendly and civil, working together, sharing notes, and pulling for the good of all. Other times, Well, just look at us since 2016, right? The end of a relationship, though, is like an election where skeptical cantankerous me wins. And sometimes it's an upset and one of the independents wins and crazy as fuck me goes batshit insane and gets spiteful and generally sends an atom bomb into their lives and other relationships trying to eradicate the debris. And once things have settled a bit, the parties pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and the cycle starts all over again. A battle for power and control. Our brains are complicated, and so are the brains of those we love. We're like two countries trying to ally, while our own inner factions and political turmoil are raising a ruckus about what we really want and the directions we're going in. It's confusing as fuck to look at it from the outside, as Innermind said. If you really, though, pay attention to what's going on, it's way crazier behind the scenes. So that was the writing in 2016. And I have to say that although I completely forgot that I had written this, reading it over now, I know that over the years, I have spent time picking out the political factions in my own mind. And I can actually sit quietly in a conversation and feel the politicians, the relationship politicians in my head debating with each other and fighting for power. And I bet all of you have experienced this at least once or twice. You're in the middle of a conversation, for example, and your initial reaction is to say one thing. And something in your head says, hold up there, partner. How about let's think about this for a moment? Do we really feel this right now? Or maybe are we just wanting to hold off on that and see how things go? After all, we're here for the good of the people, right? Tell me how much you love my silly little voices, because I'm working hard here, y'all. Anyway, just kidding. But what I'm saying is all of us have these many different personalities inside of us. And so when we break up, we can look at all of the good that was a part of the relationship, or especially if skeptical cantankerous me is in charge, we can look at all the bad of the relationship. And one of the ways that we generally process these things, right, is we talk them out. We post them. We say we're frustrated. We vague book. We talk about, oh, it was so hard dealing with this, that, and the other thing, and I'm glad I don't have to anymore. And we're able to do that because the political party that's in charge in our head at that moment is the one running the narrative, right? So some of the responses from the original writing, to me, had some interesting insights. Blue Eyes said, we all have many sides or facets or aspects to ourselves. Some the real world never sees. Some our kinky friends never see. Some only the most intimate of lovers get to or have to see. So much of this makes sense to me. How many people, show of hands, show of hearts, whatever, how many people love Billy Joel's The Stranger? I love it. It's a great song. We all have a face that we hide away, right? A mask that people don't get to see behind. But it comes out sometimes, especially when we break up with people, especially when it's a bad breakup. Teddy Bear Spanks cracked. And that is when wise old mommy daddy me looks over their reading glasses and says, there, kids, just play nice. Good Girl from Georgia offered, some agonize and obsess on the way they feel they were wronged and use this to justify irresponsible words or actions. This happens in all sorts of relationships. What we can hope for and maybe even model is a conscious choice to see ourselves. This includes the self-awareness to realize we are all of the faces you mentioned above. To me, that is empowering. Grizzly Adams quoted me saying, "Our brains are complicated, and so are the brains of those we love. We're like two countries trying to ally while our own interfactions and political turmoil are raising a ruckus about what we really want and the directions we're going in." I needed to hear this. Veronica Vale makes a good point. Many relationships can end in healthier ways. I have another theory on this issue. Similar to how teenagers start distancing themselves and point out everything their parents do wrong before they leave the nest. I think in relationships, sometimes we start looking for every mistake and making assumptions when we feel the relationship is ending and start to ignore the good. As humans, we're more commonly stuck in all or nothing, dichotomous thinking. Once you make that switch internally about a partner, it's easier to let them go, and it's extremely hard to come back from that. I think time usually helps us get back to a healthier view of our exes when we're not still grieving the loss. I don't know, just some thoughts I've had on breakups. Cobalt says, yes, this. Trying to reform the self of, or independent self. The sense of independent self. Got it. Thank you for correcting that. Okay, so yes, and that means that independent me is looking at how this relationship is going on and saying, hey, skeptical cantankerous me, can you step in here? Let's create an alliance and start pulling back, right? Because I don't think that this is as good for me anymore as it used to be. I don't think that this is where I want to be anymore. So I want to start disengaging and pulling back and becoming, more of myself. What do you all think? Anyone on Moan, would you like to come up and speak or share some experiences with me? Or is there anybody on the chat that has any feedback or thoughts on the issue? To me, I see a lot of this. Like right now in our local community, there is someone who recently had a bad breakup. They went out and they did something with somebody else. They got in a bit of trouble there. And so local events started banning them. And for some reason, they still have those mental ties to the previous relationship. And they're thinking that relationship is the reason they're getting banned. And so now they're starting to dig up all the negativity in their mind and say, well, this person must be talking about this, and that's why I'm being banned, but they did this and they did that, and so on and so forth. Humans are amazing encyclopedic systems. We can focus in. The reticular activation system, for example, we can focus into our brain or focus around us on what is green, right? We can focus back on our relationships of what went well, what went awfully, what am I upset about? Mistress K, how are you today, dear? Oh, unmute. Hey, hey, hey.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
I'm good. I am realizing that getting back out there and trying to meet people after not meeting new people for a long time with COVID is presenting its own challenges. I'm awkward as fuck, apparently.
Same, girl. Same. Like, we were just talking about this the other day, how like COVID, we're talking about a friend of ours that's had some challenges after COVID, and we were sitting there going, we get it. It's like riding a bicycle, but not.
But not, yeah. And as much as I have loved the freeing conversations that I've had on the Moan app and in other spaces, and on Twitter, it's realized that I have a different way of speaking to that audience that I need to remember how to adjust. I am meeting somebody new, but that's not the subject of this talk. As far as like breakup goes and that kind of lashing out, Jekyll and Hyde sense, I was thinking about the situation that you just mentioned of the person who broke up and then their thought was that rather than looking at their own behavior that was causing them to get banned, they immediately projected it onto their ex. That their ex had these ulterior motives or, this ulterior design on them.
100%. And that's okay. I'm gonna, if you have more to say, please hold it, because I really want to dig into this for a minute.
Right? Yeah.
Because I just recently wrote something. It'll come out in about 2 weeks because I wrote it like yesterday or the day before, about abuse in relationships. And the idea that first and foremost, if somebody doesn't want us somewhere, we should look at why we are not wanted, right? It seems very simple. It's not their fault we are not wanted. It may not even be our fault. It may be basic incompatibility, but always turn inward versus pointing outward is my thought on that. And then the other thing is looking at the idea of blame in a relationship, to the point where this is what I was talking about, and I'm going to give a little preview here. I learned something from the Johnny Depp trial.
Oh boy.
I know. Like, I am not a huge follower of such stuff. I think I maybe watched 5 videos, but one of them was the forensic psychologist, and she was major brilliant, super duper, like, mind crush there. And one of the things that she talked about was forensic psychology, which is all about diving in objectively and looking for the patterns and the data and analyzing that. And in the writing that I have coming up, which will also be a podcast and put up on YouTube, I talk about several stages of trauma, and the forensics and investigation is the second stage. And what you just brought up reminded me of that, which is we also have to look back at our relationships, especially ones we've been traumatized by, or as Roger says, and Roger, I'm going to get to you in just a minute, that we're resentful about, right? And look at our patterns in the relationship, even and especially if it was abusive. We need to look at what we allowed, how we allowed it, and even in some cases, how we enabled it. But that's something that comes after the trauma is over. We cannot do that while we're still in crisis mode.
Right. And that is not in an effort to place blame or to victim victim blame, victim shame, victim any of that kind of stuff. Like it's not in a sense of like, well, I brought this on myself. It's more of you need to examine the patterns of behavior to see what happened so that we can have healthier relationships in the future and avoid repeating those patterns and mistakes.
Mistress K, let me just say, I love you. I adore your brain. You hit the nail right on the head.
Because I think that, when you say something like what we did to enable it, what we did to allow it, I think people can hear that and immediately think, oh, well, you're just shaming. Right. They can come from a very different place. It's like, well, or it can come from an incredibly defensive place, especially if you have been someone whose consent has been violated or has been in an abusive situation. I mean, there are absolutely situations and times when you did nothing. You were abused. You were victimized. There was nothing you could have done and no behavior changes on your part would have prevented that. There are absolutely occasions where that happens.
100%.
And so I think that it's important to say, like, when you talk about like what I did, examine it. And if that's the case, there's nothing you can do that can happen, then integrate that knowledge into your own healing and move forward. Yeah. But if there was a case, and you have spoken this with your own relationship, where you have talked about there were things that you could have done better, or that enable, and I'm correct me if I'm wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just going on what I've known in the conversations that we have had in the past, where you have done this work of internal examination and you have integrated that information into your past of what happened, what was your role in that relationship. And you have integrated that information into the knowledge to not have that in your life moving forward.
Correct. I
think it's important for people to know where you're coming from with that.
100%. I think the key is there, and this needs to be said clearly. If someone is abusive, they are to blame for the abuse. There's no way around that. It doesn't matter whether I allowed the abuse. It doesn't matter whether I enabled the abuse. If you're being an asshole, you're to blame for being an asshole. Period. End of story. Right?
Mm-hmm.
If I allowed that behavior, if I encourage that behavior by accepting it over and over and over again, I am still not to blame for that behavior. What the forensics and investigation allows in the case that I'm speaking of right now is for me or anyone to go back, look at that behavior and say, I know better how not to do that moving forward. I did the best I could then. I did the best I could in that situation. I did the best I knew how. I survived in the only way I could.
Yes.
And moving forward, when I begin to recognize that behavior again, I have now thought it through and I know how I will choose to react moving forward. What this does is for me, and like I said, I talk a lot more about this in the piece that's coming up. But what this does for me is it allows me to close the box on that, put that away, and know that in those areas where I'm able to say, I recognize that behavior, I will not then create an additional, 10 years of relationship with that person.
Right. So I wanted to kind of go back to the idea of this sense of projecting an ulterior motive on the part of your ex.
Sure.
And I had it in my head and my thoughts kind of derailed. So I'm gonna kind of go around the track a couple of times trying to figure out my thought on this. But there was a sense of, there's that phrase that hurting people hurt people. And so when someone is in pain, they are often more likely to lash out. And I think that is also the case if you are broken up with, or if you are in a relationship that ends badly and ends with a lot of negative feelings. If you don't take the time to do the forensic psychology and to process those feelings and stuff moving forward, then while you're still raw, you're not necessarily completely aware of how your actions are affecting others. You're still responsible for them. So maybe you shouldn't put yourself in that situation where you're going to potentially hurt other people.
Right.
But you're also, as this raw nerve, you're more likely to see anything that is hurtful to you. You are going to look for something else to attach it to, rather than maybe looking at your own actions.
I think that's true. I think another important bit to look at is Harlans Razor, which is, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important for us to be able to give other people the benefit of the doubt and look at it from the most generous standpoint, but not necessarily put ourselves out for that. Right? Like,
yeah.
I don't think that in fact, I know that my ex-husband did not intend to maliciously abuse me. It was a byproduct of his bipolar disorder and alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
Does that change the fact that it harmed me? And therein lies the problem, because for years, I let the fact that I know he didn't mean it keep me from doing what was necessary to protect me. And the Dr. Jekyll that I loved of him was not enough to protect me from the Mr. Hyde, right?
And conversely, I think if you are in the situation where your actions have caused harm to somebody else, and I don't mean physical harm, or like accidental emotional harm, and we cannot walk through this world without doing that.
Right.
At some point, we are going to hurt people. That's just living and walking through the world, Mm-hmm. You're going to bump into somebody that you didn't mean to and accidentally knock them down. That's something that is an accidental injury that we've done to that everybody has done to somebody since they were on the playground, 100%.
Cobalt says,
but as we get older, we do less of the actual physical knocking somebody down on accident. Mm-hmm. And we do more of the inadvertent emotional knocking someone down.
Yeah.
And then we may not even realize we've done it until they actually draw it to our attention. And then when they do, how do you then deal with the knowledge that you have, without malicious intent, caused injury?
Well,
what do you do moving forward? And that then encompasses its own, like, that you add that to a breakup. You overlay that sense of how do we deal with that on top of a breakup. There's a lot to unpack, and there's a reason why there needs to be more therapists in the world to help us sort this shit out.
So on YouTube, Cobalt says, even if you think someone is too smart to be stupid, remember that trauma inhibits memory and depression inhibits curiosity, and intellect is a function of the two. And then goes on to say, and when you love someone, you don't really want them to let you hurt them. Hence, the need for boundaries. They also added, learn to sit with guilt without collapsing under the weight of toxic shame.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really, really critical. I also want to get back to what Roger said. Roger said, I agree that we have more than one side. However, the more time that goes, the less resentful I feel. I'm divorced, we have kids. So even though I was very resentful, time has moderated that. Absolutely. And I think it's important to understand that, again, like political factions, your emotional bits and pieces will get older, will fall out of favor, and be replaced with other things as you go through life. And that's a good thing, right? Because if every pain we had ever felt was as vibrant today as it was the moment that we experienced it, we wouldn't be able to grow past them as human beings. So that's pretty critical, right? Mistress K, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Just that this is such a topic that can go in spiderweb in a million different directions.
Yeah.
You know, because there's it's so multifaceted and multi-layered, and then it gets even more complicated with the more people that you put into it. I mean, if you're dealing with just a monogamous relationship and breakup, or a serial monogamy kind of style of relationship model, you've got just that one person. But then when you add in non-monogamy, like polyamory or swinging or something like that, then when you have the breakups and stuff, you've still got this whole section of the spider web with that relationship. Meanwhile, this tether of the spider web may have broken. And how does that then affect the balance and how that all works? There's just so much that can go into it. And the more threads that you have that are connecting you with people, the more you have to manage this.
100%. Teak Rock and Rolla from, sorry about that, YouTube says, the political factions analogy is perfect, right? And then Cobalt added, recently I realized I learned as a child that adults are not trustworthy. And as I grew up, it included myself, right? So that's a whole piece of like ourselves. What did we learn as kids? And I read, Cobalt, I know you'd mentioned this earlier. I read a book when I was, I don't know, I think 14, maybe it came out. It was called When Rabbit Howls. And it was kind of like The Three Faces of Eve or Sybil. It was a book about somebody who had multiple personality disorder, MPD. And the book was written by the personalities as they went through therapy. And one of the things that I found absolutely fascinating about it is that many of the personalities represented a portion of that woman's life that never grew up. They weren't allowed to. They were too traumatized to ever grow beyond that age, whatever age that was. It might be 13, it might be 4, it might be 2, whatever. And this is what I mean when I say it's a good thing for most of us that the hurt that we feel does not stay as sharp today as it was then, right? We have been able to, you know, let those pale, let those fade and grow past them. Whereas a lot of people, especially those with like multiple personality disorders, which Cobalt says, that's what I'm going through right now. But also the personalities that emerge to parent those child parts. Yeah, there are personalities that come out in order to protect them. Now, if you look at something like this, if you have an interest in reading, I highly recommend this book, When Rabbit Howls. But it shows the inner workings of the brain in a very extreme, fractured way that this conversation talks about in a more, cohesive and, each personality doesn't literally take over the body and the other personalities don't know what's going on with people who are integrated. But with people with MPD, right, it's completely fractured and there's a lot of segmentation in there. And you can see reading through this book how our brains actually work and what happens when that's taken to extremes. And I just thought of that. Like I hadn't thought about that in this context, but it does actually work as, sort of like this is what happens when our brains go in hyperdrive mode with these multiple politicians and factions and personalities and so on and so forth. So, yeah. So, are there any additional questions about this topic, about how all of this works together? I know it's not something that is necessarily easily digestible, but I would suggest a challenge for everyone here to next time you're in a conversation with somebody, maybe a stressful conversation, pause and listen to the different voices, impulses in your head and try to separate them out and realize how many different yous there can be in even a simple conversation. So, yeah. So I'm not seeing any additional questions. So I'm going to go ahead and say thank you, everyone, for joining me today. Again, this was a Throwback Thursday, and you can always listen to Throwback Thursdays at podcast.datingkinky.com. And of course, I also put out podcasts Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings with, the thoughts and the things that I'm thinking about and planning and so on and so forth. And if you're interested in kinky education and connections, visit us at datingkinky.com. For those of you who aren't aware, tonight, actually on datingkinky.com, at 8 p.m. Eastern, we've got Keeping Secrets, which is all about protecting your kink identity online. And we have Untangled, which is mentally healthy kink in a vanilla world. And both of those are absolutely free to everyone to join this evening. You can find out more about those at datingkinky.com/events. We host between 12 and 16 events, free events, educational, every single month. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to leave a comment on the video on Facebook or on YouTube. Reach out to me with a message on Moan, or you can find me on FetLife as Nookie Notes. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Oh, and please, huge round of applause, snaps, everything for Mistress K and her contributions, because I love her brain and she's always wonderful. So thanks all. Have a wonderful, wonderful